Before I begin tonight's episode, I would have to warn you that some of what you are about to hear will be graphic. Those of you who are a bit more sensitive can possibly explore other audio videos from my library. If you're still here, let's begin. Albert Fish was a notorious child molester, serial killer, and cannibal who confessed to several child murders soon after he was arrested. Each one of his confessions was more depraved than the last. His reputation eventually earned him several nicknames such as the Gray Man, the Werewolf of Wisteria, the Brooklyn Vampire, the Moon Maniac, and the Boogeyman. Although the Gray Man stuck with him due to his children's description of his skin color. Although tonight we will not go fully into his lifestyle of stalking and finding children, it is important to note that Fish was described to have a sort of grandfatherish type of appeal to him. He also had over 30 years of experience and practice on how to manipulate children, and so he knew exactly how to work that to his own benefit. Fish had a twisted style of self-mutilation and punishment ritual. He would often use a cat o' nine tails to whip himself bloody, and during one x-ray, it was discovered that he had self-inserted more than 2,000 needles inside his perineum. As a side note, for those of you who do not know what the perineum is, that is the area between the man's jingle bells and his blowhole. It is also known as No Man's Land, and if you're a Lord of the Rings fan, you're more than welcome to call it Mordor. Back to Fish. So the way that Albert unintentionally met Grace was through a newspaper article that her brother had posted looking for a job that read, quote, "Young man 18, wishes position in country, Edward Budd, 406 West 15th Street," end quote. Fish immediately saw this as an opportunity to find his next victim, and so he answered the ad, visiting the family and making initial introductions. Fish and Edward agreed on a date where Fish would return back to pick him up for the job, and so he left. Shortly after arriving the second time, Grace Budd, who was a beautiful, polite 10-year-old, ran up to Fish and sat on his lap while he was waiting for her brother to get ready to leave with him. Fish, trying to flatter her family, pulled out a stack of money and asked Grace to count it for him. While she was busy doing that, Fish made up his mind to take her instead and quickly made up a story having to attend a niece's birthday party. He convinced her parents to let Grace accompany him to the party that evening. Unfortunately, the last time the Budds ever saw Grace was as she was walking away with the Gray Man to what they thought was going to be a birthday party. As I mentioned earlier tonight, we are only going to focus on 2 letters where Fish confessed to several murders. The most famous one being the one about Grace, but many people don't know that there was actually a second one that I will also read for you tonight. Once again, I must warn you that if you are too sensitive to graphic material, I urge you to turn away now. Still here? Here's Fish's letter to the Budd family, and I quote, "My dear Miss Budd, in 1894, a friend of mine shipped as a deckhand on the steamer Tacoma, Captain John Davis. They sailed from San Francisco to Hong Kong, China. On arriving there, he and 2 others went ashore and got drunk. When they returned, the boat was gone. At that time, there was a great famine in China. Meat of any kind was from $1 to $3 a pound. So great was the suffering among the poor that all children under 12 were sold for food in order to keep others from starving. A boy or girl under 14 was not safe in the street. You could go into any shop and ask for steak chops or stew meat. Part of the naked body of a boy or girl would be brought out and just what you wanted cut from it. A boy or girl's behind, which is the sweetest part of the body and sold as veal cutlet, brought the highest price. John stayed there for so long he acquired a taste for human flesh. On his return to New York City, he stole 2 boys, one 7, one 11. Took them to his home, stripped them naked, tied them in the closet, then burnt everything they had on. Several times every day and night he spanked them, tortured them, to make their meat good and tender. First he killed the 11-year-old boy because he had the fattest ass and of course the most meat on it. Every part of his body was cooked and eaten except the head, bones and guts. He was roasted in the oven, all of his ass, boiled, broiled, fried and stewed. The little boy was next. Went the same way. At that time, I was living at 409 East 100th Street, near Right Side. He told me so often how good human flesh was, I've made up my mind to taste it. On Sunday, June 3rd, 1928, I called on you at 406 West 15th Street. Brought you potted cheese strawberries. We had lunch. Grace sat on my lap and kissed me. I've made up my mind to eat her. On the pretense of taking her to a party, you said yes, she could go. I took her to an empty house in Westchester I had already picked out. When we got there, I told her to remain outside. She picked wildflowers. I went upstairs and stripped all of my clothes off. I knew if I did not, I would get her blood on them. When all was ready, I went to the window and called her. Then I hid in the closet until she was in the room. When she saw me all naked, she began to cry and tried to run downstairs. I grabbed her and she said she would tell her mama. First, I stripped her naked. Oh, she did kick, bite, and scratch. I choked her to death, then cut her in small pieces so I can take my meat to my rooms, cook, and eat. How sweet and tender her little ass was roasted in the oven. It took me 9 days to eat her entire body. I did not fuck her though. I could have if I wished. She died a virgin. End of quote. In regards to Edward Budd, Fish later confessed that he planned to tie him up, mutilate him, and leave him to bleed to death. On February 11, 1927, 3-year-old Billy Beaton and his 12-year-old brother were playing in the apartment hallway in Brooklyn with 4-year-old Billy Gaffney. When the 12-year-old left for his apartment, both the younger boys disappeared. Beaton was found later on the roof of the apartment. He was asked what happened to Gaffney, and Beaton said, "The boogeyman took him." Gaffney's body was never recovered. Oddly enough, while Albert Fish was doing his murders, there was also a second serial killer by the name of Peter Kutsinowski, who was also thought to be a suspect in the disappearance of these children. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to learn more about him. Here is a letter about Billy, and I quote, "I brought him to the Riker Avenue dumps. There is a house that stands alone not far from where I took him. I took the boy there, stripped him naked and tied his hands and feet and gagged him with a piece of dirt rag I picked up from the dump. Then I burnt his clothes, threw his shoes in the dump. Then I walked back and took the trolley to 59th Street at 2 a.m. and walked from there home. Next day about 2 p.m. I took tools, a good heavy cat o' nine tails, homemade, short handle, cut one of my belts in half, slit these halves in 6 strips about 8 inches long. I whipped his bare behind till the blood ran from his legs. I cut off his ears, nose, slit his mouth from ear to ear, gouged his eyes. He was dead then. I stuck the knife in his belly and held my mouth to his body and drank his blood. I picked up 4 old potato sacks and gathered a pile of stones. Then I cut him up. I had a grip with me. I put his nose, ears, and a few slices of his belly in the grip. Then I cut him through the middle of his body, just below the belly button. Then through his legs about 2 inches below his behind. I put this in my grip with a lot of paper. I cut off the head, feet, arms, hands, and the legs below the knee. This I put in sacks weighted with stones, tied the ends, and threw him into the pools of slimy water you will see all along the road going to North Beach. I came home with my meat. I had the front of his body I liked the best, his monkeys and peewees, and a nice little fat behind to roast in the oven and eat. I made a stew out of his ears, nose, pieces of his face and belly. I put onions, carrots, turnips, celery, salt, and pepper. It was good. Then I split the cheeks of his behind open, cut off his monkey and peewees and washed them first. I put strips of bacon on each cheek of his behind and put them in the oven. Then I picked up 4 onions, and when the meat was roasted about a quarter hour, I poured about a pint of water over it for gravy and put it in the onions. At frequent intervals, I blasted his behind with a wooden spoon so the meat could be nice and juicy. In about 2 hours, it was nice and brown, cooked through. I never ate any roast turkey that tasted half as good as his sweet, fat little behind did. I ate every bit of the meat in about 4 days. His little monkey was as sweet as a nut, but his peewees, I could not chew. Threw them in the toilet. End quote. Well, if you're still with me, you're a brave soul. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Albert Fish's Confessions Letter. If you have any ideas for a future show you would like to hear me do, please let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much. Take care and stay strange.